This is a little introduction into adding and subtracting rational numbers. I think the important thing around this concept is you just need to do a whole bunch of them. You need to find a method that works for you. These methods may or may not be the ones that are for you. You do a whole bunch, you look for what mistakes you're constantly making. You start to kind of identify the mistakes and then you improve. I mean, I have done hundreds of them and I can tell you that it takes doing lots of them and then you get it and then you're like, oh, and then you stop making the same mistakes. Okay, so in terms of adding and subtracting rational numbers, once again, a rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. And we're going to be looking specifically at some integers and then some decimals, and also as well as we'll look at some fractions in class with positive and negative values. So one method is to use a number line, and that's going to be easier for something that are just integers. It's also helpful when you're doing something like this to kind of get a sense of where you are on the number line. Are you overall positive or negative? This is the method that I was taught, and this is the one that I use, but once again, you might find a method that works better for you. It's using absolute value, and absolute value is, you might remember these little symbols, and it's the distance from 0. That's a comma. So if the signs are the same, add the absolute value and keep the sign. So for example, here's a -4 and -3. So once again, if it was on a number line, I'd be -4, and then I'm going to add -3. So I'm becoming more negative. 1, 2, 3. So I'm at -7. And in terms of absolute values, the absolute value of -4 is 4. The absolute value of -3 is 3. 4 plus 3 is 7. And overall, I'm only negative. So my answer is negative. And then this one's kind of straightforward. They're both positives. So when I add them, 4.2, my overall answer is also going to be positive. Okay, so it works with both negative or both positive, and keep the sign. Now, sometimes the signs are going to be different. Now, always ask yourself, is my answer going to be positive or negative? So start with that in mind. So I look here and I'm like -5 and 6.1. Overall, I can see I have more positives, so I know my answer is going to be positive. So I'm just going to put my plus sign before I do anything so that I know I have the right sign at least. So when the signs are different, you're going to think about the absolute values, and you're going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the absolute value. Oopsie, I was having typing issues. Of the larger absolute value. So here's the absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of 6.1, how far away is it from 0, is 6.1. I'm going to take the smaller number and subtract it from the larger number. So I'm going to do 6.1 minus 5. Remember to line up your decimals. And I get 1.1. And I knew that overall I had more positive, so my answer is positive 1.1, or 1 1/10. Same thing, I have different signs. Before I start, I ask myself, is my answer going to be positive or negative? I have more negatives, so I know I'm going to end with a negative answer. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of -6, how far away is it from 0, is 6. I'm going to take the larger number and subtract the smaller number from it, so I get 1. So overall, I had one more negative than positive. And if you had thought about it doing your little pluses and minuses, which is another strategy, I have 5 positives, 6 negatives, and my 0 pairs are going to cancel out, and I'm going to be left with one more negative than positive. Okay, now, what happens when we start introducing decimals? So same type of thing. I have different signs here. I'm going to always ask myself first, do I have more positive or more negative? So I can see I have more negative, so my answer is going to be negative. I'm going to take the absolute value of each number. So I'm going to go 3 and 1.2. I'm going to take the big number minus the small number. Okay, and I'm going to get 1.8. And overall, my answer was more negative than positive. Okay, here I have -6.4 and -2, plus -2. Overall, I have more negatives, so my answer is going to be negative. And in this case, they have the same sign. So I'm going to take the absolute value, 6.4, the absolute value, 2, and when they're the same sign, oopsie, when they're the same sign, you just keep the sign and add them. So 6.4 plus 2 is 8.4, and overall my answer was negative. So once again, I ask myself first, do I have more positives or negatives? I have more negatives. In fact, I have only negatives, so I know my answer is going to be far away from 0. So I take the absolute value of this number, 6.3, the absolute value of this number, 3, and when they're the same sign, I'm just going to add the numbers. 6.3 plus 3 is 9.3, and they're both negative, so my answer is going to be negative. Number 4, I ask myself, what do I have more of? More positives or more negatives? I have more positives, so I'm going to end up with a positive answer. I like to put the plus there when I'm doing these just so that I don't forget that I've dealt with the sign. You don't need it there for the positive, but it's just a good, helpful reminder. I have different signs, so I'm going to take the absolute value of each one, 9.2. Absolute value of negative 7.1 is 7.1. I'm going to take the small number, subtract it from the big one. If you need to do that over to the side, you're welcome to. So I get 2.1, or 2 1/10. So positive 2 1/10. Now, those were all addition problems, but remember sometimes when you're subtracting, you can think about subtracting as adding its opposite. So, because we know how to do all the addition problems up above. So 5 minus 8 is the same as 5 and negative 8. Okay, so if I did it on a number line, 5 minus 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Oopsie, I counted wrong. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, minus 3. So I know this is negative 3, or I could do it as positive 5 and negative 8. And you can see those 0 pairs are going to cancel out, and I'm going to be left with negative 3. So these are the same value. Just wanted to prove that to you. So once again, when I have subtraction, I can just rewrite that as adding the opposite. And then here I've got, overall, do I have more positive or negative? I have more negatives. I have only negatives. So when the signs are the same, I'm just going to add those two numbers and keep the sign. So this is the one that I think is weirdest. So once again, you're going to find the ones that bug you out. This was the one that I always struggled with as a kid. So I'm going to add the opposite. So 3 minus negative 2 is the same as just 3 plus 2. So if you think about it on a number line, 3, so here's 3. I'm going to write the problem again here. So 3 minus negative 2. So 3, and if I was going to go minus, but then add a negative, it ends up kind of flipping me that way. So I'm actually going 3 plus 2. It's weird. And once again, some things aren't going to make sense at first, but if you start to recognize the pattern and then go like, oh yeah, when they're right together, 2 negatives is the same as 2 positives there. When you think about multiplying, there's actually kind of a little hidden 1 there. So when you learn about when you multiply a negative times a negative as a positive, that's actually one of the reasons why that's happening. So this is just 3 plus 2. That may not have been as helpful for you, but oh well. Someone might have gotten it. Okay, then here, negative and a negative together, add the opposite. So this is just the same as 4 plus 1.2, or 5.2. Once again, you're going to have to practice, practice, practice. You have to identify where your mistakes are. What are the things that you always get confused? And then you do more practice, and then it starts to, like, you make less mistakes, and then you actually at some point you're like, oh, now I understand why that happens. I mean, that was a process I went through, so I'm just giving you my advice from what I remember and what helped me. So I hope that's helpful.